welcome to the Kolbe episode 234. Thank you for joining us. Bonnie, Jordan, and I are back together for part 4 in our Humanities Series. Today we conclude our discussion of the Iliad, placing ourselves in the position of the Greeks prior to the incarnation. We look at what the Greeks indicate that life was worth living or dying for, along with burial and the idea of suffering in the world. Our aim is to provide some launching points for discussion or to inspire you to pick up one of these great books to enjoy yourself. We hope that you'll enjoy the show.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, Kolbe homeschooling mom of 4 lads and lasses, liturgical musician, popcorn, and podcast fanatic.
And this is Stephen, homeschooling father of 5 and chief homeschooling officer for Kolbe Academy.
And I'm Jordan. As a product of homeschooling, I'm proud to teach Greek and Latin for Kolbe online and serve as the Alumni and Public Relations Director.
Okay, so we are back. We are continuing on in our series on the humanities that we began in episode 220 and continued in episode 225 and 229. Jordan, how are things going for you? Catch us up a little bit. You've been on trending with Timmerie several times. You've got lots going on. Give us an update.
Yeah, I've been very busy. Trending with Timmerie. That was a fun conversation about burner phones and cell phones, and if homeschooling can help kind of release or relieve some of the pressure that kids feel at school to have a phone, I guess. That, and then Morning Air. I was on the Morning Air show to sort of promote the Newman Guide and Kolbe partnership for the college fair. So that was a lot of fun. And then I spoke at the college fair, and got another article in at Prime Matters, which was a lot of fun about Latin, how Latin names work and how that's significant to the word Christian. And so if anybody's interested to learn about that, just check it out at Prime Matters.
Okay, cool. We'll have some links in our notes for that. You're like quite the media personality now. So what's it like doing live radio versus podcasting?
Well, I like them both. Both are fun. We talk about it here and with all of our guests when people come on, and how if they make a mistake or something comes out wrong, it's easy to edit that out. And live radio is kind of, I kind of like it. There's like a little bit more pressure, and because you've got to keep talking. You've got to keep talking and not let there be dead air at all. And if you can do that, and you can kind of stay on topic, sound like you know what you're talking about, then I've found you can be successful. I think it'd be hard to be a host maybe, but to come on as a guest, they always have really really good questions. Like they never throw any curveballs or anything. It's just smooth. So it's fun. I enjoy it.
Well, that's great. I'm excited for you. That's neat to see you in those places, and we'll link to those so folks can catch up a little bit and then be on the lookout for you. That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, you've also been leading a group of people through a book, the Let Beauty Speak with some Kolbe.
That's been really successful actually. This Let Beauty Speak, Jimmy Mitchell's book, and it's just been fun. So this is for Kolbe parents, and they're reading it in the online academy also with teachers going through this idea of let beauty speak. And what they say is how to be human in basically a modern technological world. And there's just these little practical tips and things. And yeah, a lot. We just did one this week, and 20 or so people were there, and we're just discussing, and it's given me a chance to meet the parents of a lot of my students, actually. So that's who's showing up, and then we do a lot of just discussing the book and kind of just testimonials. And really, it's been a way to make friends. That's what I think. Friends that we all have something in common and get to know the families a little bit better. So that's been really good. So if anyone's interested in that, I'm sure we can link to more information about the next one. And the recordings are out there also. I think that both recordings are on YouTube or somewhere.
Yep. We'll link to those. And we're going to be visiting with Jimmy Mitchell in an upcoming recording. I think this episode is scheduled to come out before that one, but that will be available shortly thereafter. So that's a neat thing going on this year. It's a neat way to bring everybody together. And yeah, Good deal. Stephen, how about you? Catch us up a little bit on you.
Wow, I'm just after Jordan's list of things. What have I done? I've finished the Iliad. That's been just things are moving along. Lots of meetings and things for preparing for the next school year. This is at Kolbe. It's like, okay, the school year started, so we're focused on the next school year already. It's very little time to just sit and enjoy the school year. It's always planning ahead for what needs to be done. But
Yep. Surprising to think
Well,
about how quickly that starts. Go ahead, Jordan.
yeah, I was going to ask about you, Bonnie. How are things for you?
Oh, let's see. It's similar to Stephen. I'm like, what did I even do this week? I'm not really sure. It's kind of passed in a blur. A couple of the kids are active in robotics in this family, so that season is getting off the ground. What else? Our parish patronal feast day is coming up, so we're preparing a celebration for that mass, and yeah, things going along. So we're picking up where we left off in episode 229, talking about the Iliad. This is part of Kolbe's Greek year, Greek literature, history. Catch us up a little bit and take it away from here on the Iliad.
yeah, so this is as we're recording this. This is just as my daughter is in an online class this year, and she's just has the last two books. There are 24 books in the Iliad. Last two books she has to go, I believe. And then they'll be done in the online program as well. So it's been a lot of fun. We've had some great conversations here as we've gone through. And my son, who's at the East Coast campus of TAC, as we've mentioned in these other books, has just turned in a paper on the Iliad that he had to write. So they've wrapped that up, and I think they're in the Odyssey now or something. They go through at a faster pace, being at a college level instead of a high school level, ninth grade. But we mentioned in the last episode, if we're not careful, we're going to spend more of our listeners' time hearing about people who read the Iliad than it would actually take them to read the Iliad. So we're going to wrap this up today. But some big points that even if you haven't had a chance to sit down and read the Iliad, I think that hopefully you some questions or some things you can ask your children about and see what they think about things. But I think when we left off, we had Achilles was sitting out of the battle, and we had some good views of Hector in Troy, and things where the gods had promised that Zeus is going to give glory to Hector first so that he can give glory to Achilles later. And I'm going to kind of breeze through some of this, but basically book 7, where you're getting Hector versus Telamonian Aias, or I don't know how you pronounce it. Ajax is what we would call it in kind of an English, this great warrior, not a great man necessarily with the Greeks, but a great warrior. And it starts out with them fighting, but book 7 through 15, you're basically seeing a lot of the different heroes. So we saw Diomedes in earlier books. Now we're getting Ajax here. We're getting Agamemnon's going to go out and have some glorious battles. But it seems to be, again, setting up like here are the greatest of the Greeks going out and fighting and doing their things, and yet they get injured or they're not able to hold the Trojans back. And you're constantly seeing Hector taking the battle. And again, in the online classes and in most conversations about the Iliad that I've had with either myself or with students, it's who's the greater man, Hector or Achilles? And I know it's revealed in earlier ones that in our household, there's not really a debate. It's Achilles. And I think a careful read, and you don't even have to read that carefully. This is clearly about the great man Achilles, and Hector is a great man. But I think it's important again, and I fell into this pitfall myself this time again, is trying to impose Christian values on this pre-Christian text. It's really hard to do.
To avoid doing, right? It's hard to avoid.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because I wanted to see, like, for whatever reason, I was focusing on, there'll be guys who will kill somebody, maybe they won't be merciful, like a guy will grab his knees and he'll go ahead and kill him anyway. And then there's the stripping of armor, and a couple of times both it's a defiling of a body. Like we're going to take the body back and let the birds and dogs rip it apart. And you think, is that a? I kept thinking, are they going to show that as being a bad thing? But they don't really. I mean, we'll get to some parts about the body and burial in the Greek culture, but um, they don't really call that out as being
Hmm.
bad, or it's like, isn't it obvious that that would there's a with the burying of the body, I think we'll return to as we're kind of moving along. But yeah, I kept hoping, well, I kept expecting this sort of thing like you see in the Bible, even the Old Testament, where you'll see people doing bad things and they're not necessarily explicitly called out for it in every instance, but you see the bad effects of what they're doing. So, Samson always comes to mind there, where you hear like the childhood stories of Samson in the Old Testament, and you think, oh, this great warrior for the Jewish people, and yes, a great warrior, but wow, does he break the law all the time, as far as he's not shown to be a good man at all. But they don't necessarily call it out explicitly all the time. They just point out he did these bad things and move on. So maybe that's similar here, that they're just, this is just what happened, or this is what we're showing. But that's interesting.
It makes, yeah, and the violence of the Old Testament can be scandalous also, because it's in our own Bible. But there is something, I mean, it has to be there. The fact that we couldn't write, you could hardly write a book now with that kind of violence and it be tolerable to anybody. You have to completely dehumanize the other side, instead of there being a debate between the two, Hector and Achilles, like who is greater, or which side you want to win. You can feel sympathetic to both sides and all of that. And everybody is a human. And I really think that is why, like J.R.R. Tolkien, if you imagine like stripping armor or defiling a body or whatever, those kind of things, you don't care if it's an orc. You don't really care. And post Christianity, or in our Christian context, we have a hard time looking at other humans, any humans, as we look at orcs and things like that. I'm sure that's why he had to write the book, J.R.R. Tolkien, the way that he did, that it was monsters, not really humans.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, just because I remember kind of starting up with my oldest boy. We were doing a little bit of role-playing games when he was like early in his high school thing, but I really took that from Tolkien. I didn't want it to be, because here you're being, fantasy warriors are going out, and he was with a couple of his friends, and that was a parameter that I set up. It was like, we're not going to have, evil things are going to be evil and good things are going to be good. I didn't want to have that sort of drama. If you're like, well, I'm going to attack this guy with my sword, you need it. I wanted that for my children at that point, not thinking about, oh, this is another person who's striving for, salvation and all of, but just, nope, those are the bad guys. It's, you're fighting them. It's okay to do these things, but but that's hard. I mean, that's almost what you have to do these days. Make orcs or some sort of monsters. Otherwise,
Aliens.
yeah,
It has to be something non-human that so that makes me wonder. I mean, it came up, I was at a conference and they were talking about the violence of the Old Testament, and the talk was on why still read pagan literature. I mean, that's what it was called. And the question came up from the audience, but what about the Bible? What do we do with that? And the speaker was like, yeah, that we don't know what to do with the violence of the Old Testament. That's the hard thing. I'm not saying that I know what to do with that either, but I do think that it can be a real lesson in, like, non-violence of the New Testament and the subsequent centuries, that there is a shift. There's a big change in humanity at that point. Yet we still read these texts like the Iliad, and you're right. It's really difficult to avoid imposing our viewpoint back on them, and maybe even judging them in some ways, where we might be out of line.
Yeah. Yeah, there's just so many factors that come up with Christianity that makes the reading of those difficult. Again, like always thinking like we just expect people to today to act, and even for non-Christians, even though we're in a kind of a post-Christian society, we expect people to have these fundamental principles by which they're acting. And humility, which is something which is going to be foreign to the Greeks here all throughout the Iliad, is something that we expect, even though we don't always, I think, even properly understand it in Christianity. Um, but why would you? And we've talked about this before, but why would you think humility is this great thing if you're a great man, better in most ways than everybody else around you? Why are you going to act like you're not greater than everybody else around you?
Mm-hmm.
Except God became man and was the servant of people, even though So we have an example in Christianity, but before that, not really so much.
Yeah. And all of that, it all resembles each other before Christianity. And where you see it is the role of women, and that might be that would be an interesting thing to look at, or the status of women prior to Christianity, and how you see it in other parts of the world that are untouched by Christianity. That's just one of the many aspects that we could look at. But that change, I think people just don't, we have a hard time even being conscious of this idea of like the separation after the coming of the Holy Spirit, and the change in humanity. And we still have a hard time separating that out. Now, think about somebody who doesn't even believe in that, and they think that we've just continued to evolve along these certain lines, and we're becoming better and better or whatever, and more humane of our own accord. They wouldn't see, maybe they wouldn't, or if they see it, they would attribute it to themselves, saying to ourselves, so that we just became better. But I've been doing something recently for my to my classes, I guess you might say. So I try to always I say nobody helps me out in Latin, so nobody in the other classes. So I don't spell things correctly in English on purpose, because I say I'm not going to help the English teachers if they don't help me in Latin. Then when it comes to science, I started saying that I believe that monkeys devolved from humans. Like it's going to going exactly backwards. Well, monkeys are instead of the opposite way. But in history, we actually that I think there is something to that, especially if we're talking about church history. But with Greeks and these high cultures of the ancient world, their languages were so much more complex than even when we learn like Macedonian Greek from Alexander the Great or whatever. It's already devolved a lot into more of a barbaric thing. And even that takes students years to start to learn how to speak or read Attic Greek, or even Latin, which is much closer to us. Why do languages devolve? So that's why I'm saying, like, maybe it's not evolution, but de-evolution sort of thing.
And certainly, boy, I'm going to go way off. Latin is always the beautiful thing about classical education, because both because it really teaches you a lot about grammar and things like that, but it's also a great example of when words are used precisely, where like in today's world, you have a word that you use, and 6 months down the road, it might be used for a completely have different connotations than it presently does. Maybe it takes longer than that, but it doesn't take very long. And so we speak very imprecisely and with a more reduced vocabulary today than you can, to me, it seems, than what you would like. Reading St. Thomas Aquinas in Latin is very good because he uses his words very deliberately, and he's using the same words over and over again, and they have specific meaning. So you can say, oh, this here he's used this in this English translation. This is this word actually in Latin, and they've translated it in the same way, but it's a different word. So then you can tell that he's saying something differently. But yeah.
It's interesting,
getting
that
off.
word choice. Yeah, the word choice can kind of, and the sort of repercussions, whether intended or otherwise, that precise word choices can sometimes how the hearer of those receives them, and from what their own particular experience might receive them as like some almost uppity in a way, like why are you being so
Yeah.
precise? Like,
Yeah.
okay,
And
now we have a new problem.
even your tone, like if you call somebody special, that should be a good word, but in the certain context, it's not anymore. You're like, wow, that you're really special, and
Right? Like,
you're like, what do
yeah,
you mean by that?
is that a
Yeah,
compliment? Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. Hmm.
Kind of returning back to, so as you're the parents going through the Iliad, so some of those things keep in mind though, yeah, before Christianity, but and I think it's great to ask your children about like the roles of the women, as you were saying too, and what is that like? Because all of the Greek heroes, they'll keep saying, well, he has a son over here, or like Priam has like I don't know how many, 50 wives or 50 wives or concubines sorts of, and children's like, oh, practically the whole army are the children of Priam, it seems, all of the great warriors there. So those would be things to kind of focus on as or to ask about if you haven't read. But there's also some interesting things like in these middle chapters, Agamemnon sends some of his things are going bad for the Greeks, and he sends some of his best men over to talk to Achilles and he says, I'll give you Bryce's back. I'll give you all of these awards, and you can, or reward or treasures basically, and I'll even give you my daughter, as you can take her as your wife when we're back. And Achilles says no. And you think, well, is he just being, stuck up or proud or whatever? But it's Agamemnon has taken what we'll see the greatest warrior for the Greeks, and clearly demonstrated by taking his slave that Achilles seems to view as a wife, even though I think he is maybe has another wife. I'm not sure. That's unclear. But he's clearly, Agamemnon is saying, I'm better than you. I can give you things, I can take things away from you, and you're subordinate to me. And so at first it seems like, yeah, you should just suck it up and say, fine, I'll go out and fight so we won't have as many Greeks dying. But I think that's not according to the honor of the Greeks. If Achilles is the best man and his view is for glory, which it seems to be, then returning just because the guy basically says, I'm sorry, and gives you your stuff back. I think he's still going in there and it'd be saying, yes, I am your subordinate. And so you can, whenever you want to take things back, you're going to be able to take things back. And when you give it to me, you're going to give it to me, but you're the superior. I'm the inferior in this situation. And I think I think that's something that's a good discussion point, because it's kind of hard. And that's where you might want to jump in and read some of those things too, because I think that's hard to see especially from a Christian context, that like he said he was sorry. Why not just, why hold grudges, sort of
Mhm.
thing. I think it's a different motivation than what we would see. One of the things that comes up too is we know that Achilles he has two destinies laid out before him. He can go home and live a long, peaceful life, or he can fight and die. Well, shortly following Hector, is it's going to turn out, is what he's told. So there's no heaven. My daughter will always point out there's no heaven or hell in for the Greeks here. There's just Hades, and as we find out, there's if you're not properly buried and things, you can't even get into Hades. So you're just a shifting shadow. So there's no heaven and hell for any of these fighters. It's just they're going to all end up in the same spot, provided they're buried. So what what is what is it that's worth doing in this life then becomes, I think, a question. And for Achilles, he certainly chooses, I'm going to be remembered forever as the great man that I am, I think.
Hmm. So the glory is like earthly glory is eternal glory.
Yeah, it
And
seems, yeah, I think so. I mean, at least that's the closest thing they can get, it
Mhm.
seems to be. But Yeah, and it's when so kind of keeping that in mind that the gods are going to give Achilles glory here. It's kind of interesting to see that they let all of the other heroes play their part and they get beaten back. And so the Hector is taking the fight over to the Greeks. They're they're trying to burn their ships. And so eventually things get so bad that Patroclus, Achilles' very close friend, will come and say, "Hey, just let me put on your armor. I'll go off and fight." And just the sight of your armor and your participation will turn the tide. And so Achilles says, "Yes, but don't go too far and just beat them back from the ships and then stop." And of course, we know that Patroclus is not going to heed that, but he does. He gets out there and he's just fighting everybody and he's driving everything back. But then, of course, Hector and Apollo, so Apollo guiding Hector or stepping in, those two together end up killing Patroclus, and Hector strips his armor, Achilles' armor, that he's now going to be wearing, and then he says, "I'm going to take Patroclus's body back to be." This is one of the examples, to be fed to the dogs and the birds and just complete. And so the next chapter is the Greeks trying to pull his body back, and Hector and the Trojans trying to tear the body and bring it back to Troy. So it's brutal, but it's an interesting. It's just interesting to me that's.
I mean, even the concept of burial is interesting, that humans do that, they bury their dead. And I've heard that the first shelters, even that's how humans got the idea of making shelters to live in, was making shelters for the dead to be housed in, was the initial thing. And why is that so important in the Iliad? All these, I guess you've already said, but that is it simply because they have to have the proper burial to be able to make it into Hades? Otherwise, is that why they're fighting? Like when the desecration of Hector's body and those sorts of things, it's like the worst possible thing that you could do to somebody else, I guess, is prevent them from going to Hades.
They don't specifically, I guess they do specifically kind of address it at a couple of different points. They don't explain necessarily why. I mean, it seems to be this idea of, at least Patroclus will come back as a ghost to Achilles in one of the last books and say, "Why haven't you burned my body and buried it yet? Because I can't get through the gates of Hades until you do that." And so Achilles then does that right away. So there certainly seems to be something like that. But even when a son of Zeus, there's a lot of sons of Zeus here in the Iliad, but Sarpedon, his son, is going to be killed by Patroclus, I believe. And Zeus and Hera are there, and Zeus is saying, "I think I'm going to save my son and not let him go down in this battle." And Hera's like, "He's immortal. They're all going to die anyway. We can't save every mortal, so just let him be." But then there's this comment here, and this is book 17, where they say basically, "After the soul and the years of his life have left him, carry him back to his homeland, where his brothers and countrymen shall give him due burial with tomb and gravestone. Such is the privilege of those who have perished." And it seems to be that everybody's going to die, but at least they ought to have this. The gods seem to be saying they're going to, even if they're a son of a god, they should have be buried, and the body should be treated properly. And so maybe that's the ultimate insult then, kind of, for somebody, is to say, even though we're all going to die and this is about the best we can do is be properly buried, we're not even going to allow that. We have so little respect for you. We're going to tear your body apart or let the dogs feast on you or whatever. So maybe that's just like the ultimate disrespect for somebody. Not only did you kill them, but you're not even going to give them the right of a burial. But
which is, yeah, there's we had talked about before when we were discussing this somewhat of like the suffering of people in there, like Priam or whoever, when they suffer loss, or um what is it in the Iliad, like what causes suffering, and are there examples of people like displaying how much they're suffering?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. You see it in Troy as well. I mean, like one of the earlier books with Hector and his wife, and just the turmoil of, we could all die, even though they could end it by just handing Helen back and giving back the treasure that they stole from Menelaus's house. So this fruitless war where everybody's dying and being, but I think the best example, and I think one of the key points in the whole book, is when just after Achilles has lost his armor, Patroclus is dead, but now Achilles is going to go out and fight, but he doesn't have any armor. So his mother, Thetis, the goddess, goes to Hephaestus and has armor built for Achilles. And there's this whole section in book 18 of the Iliad that where it's describing the shield of Achilles. And this to me is just so key because it has the heavens, it has the oceans, it has kind of all of the natural world, and then it has these scenes of rejoicing where everybody's at like a wedding feast and there's singing and dancing, and then there's these scenes where there's a murder and there's a dispute over between two men about this, and there's battle where people are dying and animals are getting torn apart, and there's Ares and Athena are the two gods that are portrayed in that battle scene too. But as one of my friends was pointing out, there's no sign of a heaven, a hell. There's no sign of Hades or Olympus. It's just this image of, even though there are happy times and there's great wars, there's always strife in this world. And when the shield is the armor and shield are brought to Achilles, none of his men will even look at it. And he looks at it, but it says he becomes enraged at that. So I mean, he's seeing that there's nothing in this life that's just all good. It's all mixed in with bad, evil, and good. Like, why can't he both have glory in battle and a long, happy life afterward? It's one or the other, and that just keeps that just, I think, is what motivates that he just, yeah, it motivates it. It's the thing he sees. Achilles is the only one that I really see in the book who's fighting with intentionality. So it's not doing it for revenge. He's not doing it. Agamemnon always seems to be fighting for loot and plunder. Hector is doing this to defend his clan, basically, from his adulterous brothers and his wrongdoings, to defend that. So he's defending his clan, which is a good pagan thing to do, right? So that's something. But Achilles is doing this for honor and glory, and he knows what he's doing. So again, for me, that shows up too after they have these battle scenes, and it reminds me of a Marvel superhero movie, because Achilles just crushes everything after he's got his new armor. He's going out there, he's beating everybody up. He fights a river and he's chasing the god Apollo through the battlefield. And so he's just like this god amongst men. But after he's killed Hector, which is like a paragraph in the book, after those big buildup, it's like,
Yeah.
no, it's not even close. But he goes back and he has these competitions, but where he's like wrestling and chariot races and all of these different things. But he rewards everybody. So like there's a question like, that guy cheated in the chariot race or whatever, and he just resolves it and he gives everybody treasures, basically. And it seems to be they're saying this world is unjust. It's unjust, basically, and it's broken, but I at least can act in a way that I would act were I Zeus. I'm fair to everybody, and I will remove the tension and the strife that seems to be throughout the world.
That's so interesting. The idea of acting better than the gods, that if I were in charge, I would do it this way. And it's speaking out against speaking out against a lot there. If he's showing this would be more fair, why can't you have? I find it interesting that you found this, that you've kind of seen this little, like, maybe thread through there of the whole thing, with this maybe frustration that why can't it be both? Why does it have to be that I have to die young if I'm going to obtain glory or be a nobody?
Yeah, I think it's something that the Greeks as a whole just really struggled with. I mean, because I mean, Aristotle, I remember reading where he reasons to the immortality of the soul. He says because we have an intellect, our soul has to be immortal, but he doesn't understand how it's going to work because he says you'll have this intellect, but you don't have all of your body and such to be able to do it. And Plato or through Socrates will also talk about like the Greek gods obviously can't be like these stories where Zeus has all these children and things because they're like the worst of men. So there's a part of it where I think the Greeks, because of I think they understood that this world is broken in a way, but they didn't know. I mean, they didn't have the story of the fall or that things were made to be better. So I think they're recognizing it, and and how frustrating would that be though, to know that everything's broken and that's just the way it is,
Yeah.
So
There's no remedy. Yeah.
yeah.
And there's no peace except through violence, conquest and protecting. You have to, and that is what, with Jesus coming, it brought peace to the world. And I think the goal probably for ancient peoples was to maintain peace as long as they could, but there was no means for doing it um, other than fighting and standing up for yourself, and even preemptively attacking other people, things like that. And um, man, I think I've brought it up on here before, but people don't realize that the Greek columns were painted. Right? They were bright, and we picture them to look like what we see in Washington, D.C. or something, but they were all painted, and so adding color to what is like black and white idea to us. And the more you get into these texts and study, the more you see, the more you probably, I think you would not like what you see if you could enter into that world. And then it sort of explains the mythology and the way to tell stories, as you were saying, like it's like a Marvel movie or something like that, to where then you could pass these things down, and it seems different than if you were really describing, if there are real events behind all of this, what it would look like.
Yeah. Well, there's so many things that we could talk about here, but again, one of the things that I think, because when Achilles does kill Hector, all the Greeks come and stab his body, and then he ties up Hector's body and drags him back to the ships. And even after burying Patroclus, then every day for 12 days or something, he's taking Hector's body and driving it around behind his chariot around Patroclus's his burial mound. And so again, that would be a point, I think, where a lot of people, Christian readers, would say, whoa, this can't be the hero. He killed the guy, and after we've talked about how it's important to bury somebody, drags his body, defiles his body. The gods preserve it, so they're not letting the body actually get damaged, which is, I guess, fortunate. But it doesn't seem this is not the actions of a Christian hero, certainly. But it's something worth talking with your kids about if they're reading this, to be like, well, what do you think about that? Well, when does that? How does this? When else does this happen? Is this the normal sort of thing? But the resolution of that ends up being that Zeus basically says you need to give the body back to Priam so that it can be buried. And again, the piety that's shown for Achilles, he doesn't quibble about like this is the will of the gods. He just does it right away. And then there's this greatness of soul that he shows when Priam comes, or Priam, whichever. He asks for the body and he brings gifts for Achilles. But then Achilles says, how long do you need to properly bury your son's body? And he says it's going to be 10 days. So Achilles says, so for 10 days, I will make sure none of the Greeks attack Troy, even though it's now certain Troy is going to fall. But he gives Priam this time to go and bury. So there's this, I don't know, there's so many things to kind of get into and discuss in the Iliad, and to go back and forth and then carefully read the text and see what does it actually say and how do people respond. It's a really, I think it's well placed as kind of the starting point for humanities studies or studies of ancient literature. Just lot to discuss.
My mind goes to thinking, since I play a lot of funerals, I probably say that a whole lot on this podcast. This has me thinking about that, playing funerals and the respect owed to a deceased person and the prayers that continue for those who have died. And heading into this episode is coming out in November, and we're heading into that now, into the month dedicated to prayers for those who have passed from this life. And so that's kind of got my wheels turning in that direction. Just feeds right into that.
Yeah, and I think that does bring up a great point because I mean, there's this tradition of burial even before Christianity, I guess, and things, but because we know about the resurrection of the body, even though we know it's not necessarily going to be this exact stuff, since that's from a scientific standpoint, but we have an honor of the body, and that it's not just done. We're not done with it. We're going to use it again. We're going to use our body again. In Christianity, at least, it seems there's a real reason for that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm surprised how they wanted John the Baptist's body like that. That's like, what did you want to do with it? But they wanted the body. They probably didn't get the head, but at least they wanted that part. And that respect for it is really interesting, I think. And we don't think about it that much anymore because it's all separated. My brother lived in Mexico for some years, and he talked about how they would just have the body in the house. His neighbor would go over there, and the body would be there for some days or whatever. And here we hide everything. It seems like now, open caskets sometimes, but I grew up around it a lot as my dad being a Baptist pastor. I was always tasked with running the sound system for funerals. And I had like lots of encounters where I couldn't resist like looking into a casket or something. And when I was totally alone with one, my dad in his office or something, and yeah, the hope that we have, I think that would be another place where parents can talk about the difference, the distinction of the ancient world and the after Christ world, whatever we can call that. But I think that would be a place to talk about it too, is that now we have hope rather than with them. I don't know. I don't know where the hope would come from.
And I know, Jordan, you were saying that recently you were reading through Job as well, which in our Christian or our Christian roots here, at least, there's a kind of a contrasted view with Achilles, kind of like why this anger at the way things are. It seems like in Job, at least there's just a different take there, even though it doesn't explain that, suffering is beneficial or anything like that. But
yeah, the voice there is this voice which has to be the Holy Spirit throughout the Old Testament. It's harder to find. In the New Testament, it's wide open, but Job is a good example of where you can see it, where it's a man crying out that he doesn't know what he's done. He's innocent, and he will not say that he's guilty. And that's the opposite of pagan literature, because what has happened is You take something like Oedipus Rex, and Oedipus begins to blame himself and gouges his own eyes out and things. Uh, they always paint the picture that the person who is suffering is suffering, and it was their fault. It was some fault of theirs. And in pagan literature, it turns out conveniently, it always is their fault. They always were guilty of the thing that they're suffering for. Whereas with Job, you don't see that. You see him, uh, um, you know, he says, "I know my Redeemer lives," early on in the dialogue with the three friends. And then also, if you separated out Job's lamenting, and just read that, it would read very much like the Psalms. But the Psalms are different because it's just one voice, and Job has four voices through most of the book, the three friends who keep chiming in. So, but that I think that voice in the Old Testament is so distinct from everything else before Christ, in that they won't say that they're guilty. They won't accept the blame. And I think it's a good thing. It's like a precursor to an innocent victim, which we see in Christ, who was completely innocent. It's preparing the world for that, and it's changing the ancient Israelites. And speaking of violence, that if you compare what they did in their conquests, where they were much more violent than even in the Near Eastern civilizations, no one else killed and annihilated to the extent that they did, and yet they were the ones carrying this truth. In their own texts and in their own culture, carrying books like Job and the Psalms and things like that, crying out for the innocence of various victims. Isaiah also, like it's all over the Old Testament, if that's what you're looking for. And it's a huge distinction between any pagan literature. You can't find it in pagan literature at all.
We get into some of these tragedies coming up, we'll have to revisit some of these things. I know with the tragic heroes and things as we continue on our future podcasts, certainly. But
yeah, that is something I think that I would like to look for a little bit more and maybe bring out in these episodes is what exactly. I guess a really basic way to start for any listeners is to think about the perspective of the writer, who they're writing to, but also their own perspective. So if so mythology, at least the origin of myths, has to be concealing something. So if you boil it down to like a really small thing, and there's like one person that is easy to blame, and there's a lot of discord in the community. One person, maybe they're handicapped in some way, or they're just different, or they're a foreigner or whatever. You're able to dehumanize them and start to look at them as we're talking about like orcs or something that's completely other than us. And for whatever reason, the killing of that person, or the punishing, the lynching, whatever it is of that person, brings a healing effect to a community. And then the person that tells the story has to be innocent somehow. They're not going to say they're guilty. You never see that until the Gospels. They're all going to say they're innocent. So the perspective of the myth maker is, yeah, he wasn't even just handicapped. He actually was an orc. He actually had some like monstrous thing about him. He was a cyclops. He was a whatever. Maybe the cyclops was just somebody that had one eye for some reason. It didn't have to be in the middle of his head, but as you tell the story, it becomes more monstrous like that. Anyway, I think that those layers, unpacking those layers in pagan literature to sort of see the truth, myth is multi-layered a lot of times. Especially the Greek myths are the most sophisticated in that way and developed. But anyway, with that in mind, just that shift then in the Gospels, where all of a sudden the one who is lynched, the one who is killed by a mob, is proclaimed innocent immediately. That's totally different than any other literature that's out there.
Yeah, yeah, I know Aristotle would say, like in his Poetics, he will talk about like the tragic hero, and from like a story, when you bring in myth and history, then it takes on an interesting sort of twist there, because like when you're just telling a story, nobody likes it if it turns out the person like what makes a tragedy great is that there's a generally great man with a fault, and that one fault, this is, I think, roughly what Aristotle would say, brings about this disaster. But it seems just in a way that because if he had no faults, then you'd just be a sad story about something horrible happening to a good man, which we don't like. Or if he's a horrible man, then you could think kind of like, well, he just got what was coming to him. But if you, so there's that balance in the storytelling too. I know that he would say that the good stories are, good tragedies are about a man who is good except a tragic flaw that he has brings about his downfall. I think those are sad stories for us, but manageable. Where the story of our Lord, like you're saying, is here's a completely innocent man that's brutally murdered, um, and you know if that was
And the reporters are the ones who are guilty. And that never happens before. So they're saying we were wrong. Everyone abandoned him. We were wrong. He was right. And nowhere else do you find that. You only find the cover up, and that's what mythology is. It's the cover up.
Wow. Yeah. Well, Jordan, any other thoughts from your household as you guys have been continuing to read?
Well, I mean, we brought up Job, which was a lot of fun. That is in the religion course, and there's even Bible reading in the history course, which I thought was a lot of fun to do because it really connects the historical events that we're reading in Herodotus to the Bible, and really, I think for my daughter, it's really expanded her kind of perception of history and how she can piece things together so much better, like what was going on at this time. So that, and then we've been doing Greek, which is fun. I think I mentioned before, but teaching Greek to her, she really enjoys it. She's fallen into the trap that a lot of people do when they get basic Greek, is they feel guilty reading the New Testament not in Greek. So she'll try, but what I like about it, she can't get very far unless I'm right there with her. But what I like about it is that she's hungry for it, and she says she wants that's a goal for her. She wants to be able to read the New Testament in Greek one day. So hopefully she'll keep working at it. And I'm looking forward to down the road doing the same with my other children, reading through the curriculum with them, and hopefully by the time I get to my last one, who's only 5, I'll be pretty good at these texts.
All right. Well, we started this conversation in media res in the middle of the story, as is pointed out at the beginning of the course, at the beginning of the year, where the Iliad begins in the middle of the story. So here we are in the middle of it, right, coming to the finish line. We'll be continuing the conversation though as we travel through the Greek year of literature and history. Any last words at this point?
just the Iliad, I think, is just a great starting spot, which in the Kolbe's high school curriculum, and just for as people start to read some of the great books, the classics, great place to start, and then to go back to, I think, but go back to later.
Yeah, and I would just add it is worth the investment, no matter what your student is, what format they're doing the courses, and even if you just wanted to learn on your own, somebody out there, it's worth the investment. It really is. It's a great set of texts that have been chosen, and I'm constantly amazed at what they have us read. And in Herodotus especially, it'll be like, why are we reading this? But you'll get 10 pages into the assignment and you're like, oh, that's okay, Alexander the Great now. Okay, I see. So it's really good the way it's laid out. And you can take your time with it and go deep with one subject to take it all the way, and then do the next subject if you want. It's really flexible, but I think it's a lot of fun, and I would encourage everybody to at least consider trying it.
Some great responses to any skepticism, cynicism, like why this is also obscure. This happened, how does this relate to now? Those are all great counterpoints to that. Yep. All right. Well, we'll pick this up here again a few episodes down the road. Thanks, guys, for spending this time with me and discussing these for me. It's really given me a lot to think about, and hopefully our listeners as well. We'd love to hear from our listeners and how they're doing as they travel through this course or what these courses, and along there are other studies, of course, as well. You can comment on the social media posts for these episodes. You can send us email, podcast@kolbe.org. We'd really love for you to join the conversation for our listeners. And as always, our show notes have a lot to accompany what we've discussed today. Jordan and Stephen, we'll see y'all real soon.
Thank you, Bunny.
Take care. Subscribe to the Kolbe Cast on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss an episode. And let us know how we're doing by leaving a rating or a review. And as always, feel free to email us at podcast@kolbe.org.
Mary, our Mother, pray for us. St. Maximilian Kolbe, St. Ignatius of Loyola, holy saints and angels, pray for us. Ad maiorem Dei gloriam.